This is where you license Dr. Quinn Medicine
Exactly.
Hi everyone. Welcome to OSA Backstage. I'm Dani Meier, VP of Artistic and a section bassist with the Omaha Symphony. This is a podcast about the bits and pieces you don't see that make up a symphony orchestra, co-hosted by my partner in crime, assistant conductor Serena Reuten, and a variety of guests who love this orchestra on stage and off. This episode is our very first. It was a stupid amount of fun and features Principal Trombone Patrick Pfister, Assistant Principal Flute Nick Fitton, Serena, and myself. Because we're learning how to do this, expect a lot of questions where you don't necessarily know who's going to answer until they start talking. We talked about first concerts, reasons for picking our instruments, Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, yes, for real, and why the flute is the only non-ergonomic instrument on stage. We also get into mouthpiece collections. We're so glad you're here. And now, episode 0, because we didn't trust ourselves to make it episode 1, the pilot.
Okay.
Okay. Hi. Nick, would you introduce yourself as you prefer?
Sure. Hi, I'm Nicholas Fitton. I go by Nick, and I am the new assistant principal, Flute and Piccolo of the Omaha Symphony.
Pat.
I'm Patrick Pfister. I'm principal trombone, and I've been here 15 years, 16 seasons, something like that.
Time has no meaning anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I am contractually obligated to tell everybody that we're married. And you are contractually obligated to be here, so thank you. Nick, you are not married to anyone in this room, correct?
I'm not, no. I am very much single right now.
Serena, any conflict of interest romantically that we have to view?
I don't think so.
Okay, I want to ask this question of every guest that we have. But do you guys remember your very first orchestra concert at any level?
So I can't remember specifically what years it would have been, but similar to how we do concerts for youth, I think we were bussed in a few times, maybe every other year in elementary school, maybe starting in 3rd or 4th, 5th grade, certainly before I played an instrument. And then the first concert I remember after I got interested, and my mom had a coworker who was married to Bundy Williams, flute player of the Minnesota Orchestra, and she suggested that we're doing bolero and it's got to be trombone solo. So that probably would have been junior high, 8th, 9th grade probably, that I went to go see my first concert with the focus of you're a trombonist and you should hear someone really good play and hear the orchestra and take it in at a different level.
So when you said when I got interested, was there a moment after that 3rd grade busing where you came home and you were like, okay?
I mean, I had wonderful band teachers in 5th grade, so I felt like I got the bug very early, and it wasn't a concert, but my mom got me 3 Canadian brass CDs in 5th grade, and my brother had already listened to a lot of John Williams, and he was a good piano player and would play that stuff on piano, and I would kind of hack away at that. But once I got into the world of brass, I kind of knew right away that I wanted to pursue it. So who knows, maybe that bolero concert was 6th grade or something, but I'm sure I might have the ticket tucked away somewhere. But
I'm positive that you have that ticket. There's no Canadian flute.
Not that I know of, no.
So what about you? Was there a bug moment, or was it just something that you started doing in school? How did you get into
There was a bug moment for me, I think, that drew me to the flute. Every Sunday, TV was very limited in our house growing up. So on Sunday nights we could watch the Carol Burnett show, and sometimes after the Carol Burnett show, Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman would come on. And in that theme song, there's a 9-second flute solo, and every time that happened, I was like, that is so beautiful. I want to play that someday. That was really what drew me to the flute.
9 seconds.
Yeah.
Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
play that right
Yeah,
now
you need to
in
insert
post.
that.
This is where this is where you license Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman.
Exactly.
That's amazing. So
Yeah.
before you played any instrument?
Yep.
okay, so you just walked into school and said, this is my instrument, there's no other instrument.
Yeah, I knew that the flute was the instrument that I wanted to play right off the bat.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You had a slightly... I know that you started with a valve trombone, which is almost an imaginary instrument.
Right. So yeah, I started on piano when I was 7, and I was okay at it. I liked it. I was not great, and I would use it as a distraction from starting my homework. So I guess I liked it more than homework. But yeah, my brother had played trumpet, so we had a trumpet laying around, and by that point he had stopped playing in band. So in 5th grade I started on trumpet, and then my mom's boyfriend at the time had this 1890s, 1880s Boston musical manufacturer valve trombone sitting in his basement, and brought that into school, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, that thing is amazing. And it's like, peat green, kind of like my pants because of tarnish on it. And yeah, I mean, I've still got it, but that was, I think, yeah, again with the great band directors, but having something unique that no one else had, also kind of probably progressed the bug of like, this, I'm cool, maybe. I don't know if it was cool, but I felt cool.
I think that's all that matters, right? And like that must have been... how long did it take between when you started flute to when you could accurately play Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman?
Well, I actually have perfect pitch too, so it didn't take very long. So the minute that I got the fingerings and started taking flute lessons and, could figure it out, I couldn't play that in the right octave, but I got the right notes, and that was to me what really mattered. I was like, this is the start of it.
And then you stopped.
Yeah.
Nick actually doesn't play flute. He conquered Dr. Quinn. Okay, perfect pitch.
Mm-hmm.
Can we explain what that is really fast? Because inside baseball, I think we don't realize how much we're doing it until we're talking to people who did not grow up with it. So perfect pitch, like what is that?
It's basically the auditory equivalent of being able to recognize colors, right? If someone is colorblind, they may not be able to recognize colors in the same way, but generally most of us, if we see a rainbow, we can tell what the colors are in the rainbow. People with perfect pitch can do that with sound, with pitches. If they hear an A, they can recognize that right away almost as easily as someone just looking at the color red and saying that's what red is. The difference is that the percentage of the population that has perfect pitch is a lot smaller. Maybe it's the same as the amount of people that are colorblind even, but it's definitely an asset because as a musician, if you don't have to necessarily think about those things, you can progress musically faster in certain ways because you're not struggling trying to learn how to recognize pitches.
Would you say that's accurate for how... Because you're right, like if you're... Half the problem of starting an instrument is it's not just that you're learning this strange foreign thing. It's also it has a language, it has a notation, it has things. It's like learning 3 or 4 dimensional Tetris at the same time. Now we can see better. So keeping that in mind, I've also heard that perfect pitch is kind of a curse. Okay, you're very emphatic. Yeah.
It is very much a curse. Even when I started taking flute lessons, my teacher did a lot of demonstrating, and for that I'm very grateful. I have his sound always in my ear still to this day. But because he did a lot of demonstrating, there was a lot of cheating in that as well, where I would just sort of play back what I heard without actually reading what was on the page. So for me, actually reading the notes on the page in a lesson, like especially if we were playing duets, I would get off because I wasn't actually following what was on the page. I was trying to just go by what sounded correct to me.
And what's interesting is there's a lot of other styles of musicians who, Dave Grohl famously does not read music, and I believe his dad is a classical flute player, and he just has no interest in learning how to do it because he doesn't need to. He can hear everything. So I imagine like faking it until you make it, until you hit a roadblock where you absolutely can't fake it anymore. Was that was that when you were the duets kind of like that breaking point, or was it like actual band music, like music or orchestra music that you had to finally buckle down and?
I think it was mostly the duet music, and when we started to work on solo repertoire, it also sort of creeped in there too, because then his wife was a pianist herself, and they would have studio recitals of his students and her students and then combine them, so we had the opportunity to put the flute part with the piano part. But there were times when we did that also, that it was difficult for me to keep in time and along with the music, because I was just so focused on listening rather than watching what was happening. So if there was a certain amount of rests in the music, I would lose my place, because I'm trying to count, but I'm also trying to listen and remember, oh, right, the piano has that before I come in, but that lined up with the counting would somehow throw me off. So it's a blessing and a curse.
That's okay. That's fascinating to me, because I know, one of the things Pat does for preparation for concerts is listening to dozens of recordings sometimes of the piece that we're about to play. So I think as you get more comfortable as a professional, you're sometimes doing less counting and more, hopefully, being engaged with where the orchestra is supposed to be.
We have that exact moment. This weekend with our Mio is, as the fugue-ish section starts, the bass comes in, and I've got 7 bars of rest, and it kind of starts in 3. It's like a weird kind of hemiola that I used to have trouble counting. I've got a page turn and stuff, so it was always a little panic, I felt like, the first time I played it. But obviously I've gotten comfortable with it over 10 years, and then the saxophone comes in, then the trumpet comes in, and poor Scott missed his entrance on the dress rehearsal or the second rehearsal, whatever, and he's like, I was counting in 4 rather than 2, or 2 and 4, and I was like, oh, you're still counting this piece? it's one of those, like, it is so much easier. And we had a colleague at NRO, Chris Davis, who even back then with 15 years, 20 years less experience, he said, like, oh, once I played a piece, like, I never count anymore. And I don't have, I like to stay busy and engaged, counting on my fingers most of the time, but there are those moments where, especially like the Mio, where it's a solo, where it's nice to just be like, I know exactly how Nate's going to set this up, and then I come in and I add to it.
It's funny you say that, because I know that exact spot that you're talking about, and it's like, and the way I have that, like, where I'm not counting is that I know there's 2 bars, Nate comes in, and then it's 5-bar phrases, right? So that's where with your counting too, you're not in groups of 4 trying to follow the phrase, just knowing, okay, it's 5 bars, and then it's then it's the next entrance.
Right, and it unspools from there. It's but that's where doubt creeps in.
Well, and
right.
It's not too late. I'd like to publicly shame the editor who grouped things in 10-bar phrases rather than, well, they're not even phrases, 10 bars rather than actual phrases. So it makes counting, when you're a trombonist and you've got this many rests in a row, more difficult than it needs to be.
Are you saying that it's the publisher's fault?
It could be for Scott's missed entrance.
Yes, perhaps. Sometimes it's the publisher, sometimes it's the composer. I've noticed with Stravinsky, he likes to put rehearsal numbers every 5, 10, and 10 bars, which often doesn't correspond also to,
Yes, my favorite thing in a score or a part is when you have both the measure numbers in big groups and then letter numbers. So it's like, here's
letter
a big...
numbers.
Letter numbers. Yes, you're familiar with letter numbers.
It's a thing.
It's we're gonna make it happen.
Our most famous is the steak sauce, A1.
Yes. Yes.
I should have seen that one coming. A1 is delicious. Sorry, but right, it's when you have both these measure numbers that are somehow very prominent, and then you have letters at the same time that are actually marking sections, but they're competing for your eye in the part. And so I feel like half the work of a great editor or a great publisher is like, here's this beautiful thing to read that you're not second guessing. And you deal with that on an infinitely bigger scale because you're looking at scores all the time. So like, how do you even begin? Do you have to put in your markings? How do you process a ton of information when some of it is superfluous when you're looking at a score?
I guess in the process of studying, you're like visually moving the superfluous stuff away from your learning, and like I said, like breaking things down to those rests and things like that. But the advantage is we never really have to count rests because we're you know in it all the time. And so I found actually as a flute player, I had to write cues in at the ends of my rests, because that was kind of my way of counting, but then also that sense of security is having that, because I'm so used to reading scores and being able to follow along,
having everything available to you all the time.
Right, exactly.
That's really, yeah, because like obviously our noses are in front of our faces, but our eyes have blocked that out. So you're suggesting the same things. Like as you get more familiar with the part, do
you guys write cues after rests for the next, like for instruments? And
I did that for this last concert set at the Jocelyn for the Mio and for the Stravinsky. I had oboe cues that were not in the part. I wrote them in, or percussion cues in the Mio for certain things, just to know who's got the rhythm under me. There's a flute solo in the Mio, and I wrote in the cello duet underneath in my part, so that if something got off, I know exactly where to, zone in and get back on.
That's a great. I've had to do that for chamber music, but that it was like an emergency. This pianist will not calm down. I need to know what she's doing so I can actually stick with it.
I say thankfully the Mio parts do have cues before we come in, so generally speaking, so you have that to latch onto. But yeah, for me, something like the Stravinsky would have been more apt, like if I had a woodwind part where it's like Jim's got these running like I would want to know. Thankfully I didn't have to play with that, but where I would want to know to latch on just in case anything got slightly shifted. But the most involved piece I've ever had to do a couple times is the Hamlet trombone quartet. I forget who composes it, but it's unconducted and just long recitatives that, like, if I ever lose my part, which I think I did once, I had to rewrite all of the cues back in. Thankfully it's only like an 8-minute piece, but it's just like you need to know how to cue the other 3 trombones and the soloists and know what they're doing, when they're going to pause, and that takes like 2 or 3 hours to.
Well, it sounds like trust. That's a trust, and I think a lot of that is also in your colleagues. When you've been here 15, 16 years. This is your first season, but you were a long-time sub with us before you won your job, and obviously, Serena, this is your first year with us too. There's a lot of you get to know how people play, what they do right before they play. So you also have 2. I'm skipping around a little bit, but experience plus where you are in the orchestra, I think, dictate a lot how you feel like you can respond in the moment to things. So because you're principal trombone, do you feel like your prep has to cover the rest of the low brass? Are you not because they're not doing it, but because you're setting up?
Well, I'd say for like this, having just come from the library and looked at my part for the Kevin Puts piece, which no one has heard, that we will get a recording of, and ideally it would be wonderful to come in and look at the score and see how all of our parts, especially if upon listening there is some like weird fugal type thing that I need to know like how we're all moving. But generally, no, I at this point can hear what I need from a recording and know how the section will fit together. And then obviously sitting next to Scott, and when I need to, listening more to Brett, if the trombones and the French horns have things together. But I don't know, I think at this point it feels pretty natural, but there are certainly those moments in more heavily counting pieces where yes, I need to write in something super important before I come in, or something super important that I'm playing with, or and we don't usually play with, say, like the violins, or like me with Susanna, but if it was something like that where the distance is just like really hard to overcome. It's like, okay, I'll play it as quietly as I can, while hopefully still, if it's an important solo, playing out, but there always needs to be this whatever home base that you're touching, keeping track of and being grounded with, because especially when we play loud, all of that just goes
away.
Bye like so then we might get to this too, like then you're solely focused on like the conductor and the people right around you. But yeah, every piece kind of presents its own challenges or simplicities that you just sit in the pocket and or not.
You haven't had a ton of time to sit in that pocket, but
no, I haven't.
You're like dead center in the orchestra too. So you look at the setup of the stage, and the winds are almost always dead center, and you playing assistant principal and flute, assistant principal flute and piccolo. Is your focus? Is it primarily on Maria as principal flute? Are you kind of doing a triangulation between what Maria's doing, what the section behind you is doing, and the conductor? Like, how do you think about that as you prepare, or are you kind of already sitting yourself in that chair as you start working on music?
It's evolved for me as I've been freelancing before I won the job, and now that I have the job, my view of where I'm sitting is much more outwardly expanded. I used to just solely focus on my part, my section, and that was it. But now I mean, amazing colleagues in the Omaha Symphony, so there's no reason for you to just focus on yourself. It's a complete team effort, and if I were to just focus on my view, my part, right dead center, there's no vision for the rest of the orchestra. So I've got to be not only focused for myself on my part, come to rehearsal prepared, I'm also focusing on Maria, but I've also done my homework, knowing that, if I have a part that matches what the second violins are doing, I'm doing exactly what, Maria does when she's got something with the first. I've got some of it memorized, at least the beginning few measures, so that I can be watching their bows. I can see what part of the bow they're articulating on, what is their left hand doing for vibrato, things like that. So my vision has totally expanded outward from just being front and center to really trying to catch visual cues from whomever I'm playing with if I can see them in my sight line.
Which is phenomenal, because how many composers, when they write these moments where you have unison with other sections that are not literally like your fellow flute players or whatever, they're going for color. So that's really tremendous. What do you think, was there a moment where you consciously did that, or did that just start happening as you got more comfortable?
It started to evolve a little bit as I actually started to do more piccolo playing.
Okay.
Just because you can't hide, obviously, on the piccolo, and composers, there's a certain color to it. So if they match it with something that's unexpected, like trumpet, like in some Stravinsky, or
in the Mio,
Ravel,
you had the
yeah,
duo with
exactly.
Scott.
Yeah, in the Mio, there's piccolo and trumpet together. So there's got to be that understanding of, while I'm on the top, there's some sort of support system under me, and we've got to find that blend, that color that the composer's looking for. And if I'm just focused on myself, it's not going to happen.
Love that.
This is, like related is like seeing Staatskapelle Dresden for the first time when they got to see them a couple times in a week because they did a Midwest tour in 2009. But the first time was in a good hall at University of Illinois, and then they did a concert at Indiana. But especially in the more acoustically favorable hall is like this idea that all of their sounds like lend to each other, like the vibratos match so well, and the brass colors like don't overpower, they fit within, and they're bright, they're dark. Like, it's just like, holy, this is a totally different level of like sonorous playing, and I don't know, I don't know how. I feel like American orchestras have their own timbres and stuff, but yeah, it's definitely a much more, again, from a brass player's perspective, it was a more team effort approach to playing within the orchestra, and the beauty of sound is like just, yeah, it was really shocking.
It's almost like you're creating a totally different auxiliary instrument. I mean, we have standard auxiliary instruments in the orchestra: the piccolo, the English horn, bass clarinet, contrabassoon, you know, which we all see on stage, and you know, it's like, oh, the one that doesn't belong, you know.
That's too big to be allowed.
Right, exactly. But when certain instruments within the family even mix together, like, you know, in woodwind quintet writing, you know, we always say, oh, the flute and the oboe play together, they're the flobo, or the flassoon if it's flute and bassoon, you know. So it's almost like the composers know that there's this entity out there in sound by combining those instruments together to be a flassoon or a clarinet or a flobo or whatever, and or a flumpet, I don't know. You know,
it does require, though, what you guys are talking about, which is this conscious listening and engaging. And as a conductor, like, that's obviously the dream, is that I'm going to assume that's a dream. So when everybody in the ensemble is on that level, engaged and listening in, is there a moment where you can feel that happen?
I think everyone in the orchestra knows and feels when that happens. You know, even when you're not playing, you can sense when your colleagues have found that sweet spot and are playing together. Yeah.
Is it, for me, that's always when a concert goes from great to, like, I don't know what that was, but that was the best Sibelius 2.
Yes.
Or similar. I think you're right. I think we all feel it. Does anything become easier? Because I'm imagining when you're all on that same page, it does feel easier to play, to give an extra 10%, whatever you have left in the tank. I'm curious if you can you feel that at all, or is it just knowing that it feels together?
Yes, you can feel that. It's hard to describe and put into words. I don't know if you guys have a way of, you know.
I mean, I was trying to think of the conductor question, but where it's like, you know, maybe your strongest memory of a specific piece is the first time you play it, right? And if that was a good experience, it, you know, you think positively of the conductor probably, but yeah, like, I mean, played hundreds of concerts here, but it is weird how, like, just a few stick out of, like, oh wow, that was like such a special night, and it was great here, it was great in the section, and then it was also like all of us went to a different level.
I guess the closest feeling is that everyone felt very free in the moment, and I think that has to start with the conductor, that then can have everyone feel that same level of freedom, where somehow everyone's trying and giving that extra 10%, but it also feels effortless and easy, but there's that tension of, like, this is going so well, and how do we, you know, and then having that sustain through the whole concert, and then at the end of it was like, wow, that was like half an hour, but it felt like 5 minutes, but I was also so present for the entire half an hour. Presence. And so for me specifically, I can only access that, I feel like, when I have it memorized. That's when I can feel, like, if it's all in here, then I get the sense that like, nothing can get in the way of that. It's in here, so I can't mistakenly flip a score, or someone can, you know, something can happen, but but I have it, so I can bring it back. There is such a sense of security that then I feel like I can feel free, and hopefully the musicians I can give them that sense, and they can.
It's like an invitation.
Yes.
It's an invitation to be present. And that requires so much prep on everybody's part, what you all are talking about. And that leads me to my next question. You know, when we talk about a musician 9 to 5, I think sometimes the assumption is that our workday is really just the rehearsals or the services that we have, rehearsals and performances. But the reality is, especially because I live with you, I know that so much of the time spent getting ready for a program, 90% of it is actually off stage. So what do your actual 9 to 5s look like outside of the hall?
And do they look different for rehearsal only days or performance days? I really like the question, like, when does your preparation for a concert start on a concert day? Mm-hmm. Is that like when it's a concert day, that's just your entire focus for the day, or is it really like you have your strict routine that starts an hour and you can kind of not worry about it until beforehand?
When do you become Dr. Nick, Medicine Man?
Still working on that degree. But I think for me, it varies. I think it varies a lot on the program, but it also varies on what I've got going on outside of work too. And I know one of the questions too is work-life balance. And, I think part of my preparation, maybe if we have an afternoon rehearsal, is that I still teach a lot on Zoom. So I've got students remotely that I teach, and part of my teaching also is just making sure that if I have to demonstrate anything in a lesson, obviously, I want to bring the highest level of teaching and artistry to the lesson. Most of my students are actually adult amateurs, so they've played flute in high school, done the 9 to 5 thing, and then come back to flute now as just like a sheer enjoyment hobby activity, which is great. So there's not really any expectation of a competition or an audition or anything like that. But part of my preparation, for a rehearsal, for a concert, is warming up and making sure that my fundamentals in the morning are what I touch every day. Scales, long tones, harmonics, extended techniques, because really, as I preach to my students, we need to have those at our fingertips. So making sure that those are in place no matter what day it is for a rehearsal, performance, like that's my go-to in the morning, is I always touch my fundamentals.
My teacher made a big distinction between hey well, that'll be fun for the video. There it is. My teacher made a big distinction between a warm-up and a routine, because in his mind he was like, you should be able to unzip the bass from its case, tune, and then be ready to go, which in some cases is insane. But he separated them because he wanted you to have the ability to, if something happened, you were running late, that you wouldn't need to do X, Y, and Z for an hour before a service began. I think it was more oriented towards, can you show up for work no matter what and do your job, versus the routine of, have you reviewed the things that allow you to remain a good musician that will help yourself and your colleagues. So it sounds like the fundamentals is like, that is a required routine.
Yeah, and that was something, as I was finishing my undergrad degree at Peabody, that my teacher, Marina Piccinini, was just so adamant about for the entire studio. Fundamentals. It's, it's like language. If you don't have the structure of the sentence to speak, you can't communicate. So if you don't have the fundamentals of how to play your instrument, you won't be able to make music.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about tailoring a specific warm-up to how you feel that day? Because I feel like there are kind of two schools. I've had teachers feel strongly one way or another, where it's like, well, if your face feels a certain way that day, that you want to tailor your warm-up or your routine that day to address exactly how you feel that day, so that you can always bring yourself up to the same point. It's just that you always start each day at a different level, versus doing the exact same fundamental work, no matter how you feel, which some people then argue isn't really addressing maybe what you need that day, but the other people say, well, that gives you just such a solid base that will always take you to where you need to be. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so I, like Nick, had almost a crippling reliance on routine, and I never really had to perform super early at school. I would try to do my warm-up before theory class freshman year at 9 o'clock, so getting in early for that. But really it wasn't until my senior year that I would have a Friday morning rehearsal at 12:30 or something with some of the professors.
Nope.
And I would usually have been there the night before until midnight or 12:30 practicing. But so rather than doing my 2-hour routine, I would probably get in like 40 minutes, and it felt kind of panicked. But it's like, I'd go to rehearsal and it'd be totally fine. And so at that point, and I certainly played a concert, with that same group where like I did my hour and a half, 2-hour routine, and then by the end of the concert, I had no chops left. So I, at that point, started to realize less is more on those days, and that kind of goes with our preparation now in the orchestra. It's like, now my routine is generally, today I did a 27-minute warm-up, which is, again, a little tight, but 40 minutes to an hour is more ideal. But certainly, if there's, a Bruckner on a program, like I'll want to do my warm-up probably early in the day or mid-afternoon and give myself 4 or 5 hours off so that I'm pretty recharged for that. And then otherwise, like, I never really want to wait super late if it's an evening concert, but like with the Mio or like this, 2 o'clock Jocelyn concert, I like to prepare my warm-up, as it has been all week, where warm up in the morning, go straight to rehearsal. So try to put them back to back, and so that feels as normal as possible. But as far as warming up and tailoring things, I'm a mouthpiece addict, so I do sometimes a lot of my, this doesn't feel right, let me go to something a little wider, a little shallower, a little deeper, just to like, if there's swelling. And certainly with the weather in Omaha, I feel like it affects me more than maybe when I was a student. Like, just, it can be super dry, it can get super humid really quickly. So I that's where the physical change is, where I do most of that workaround, I guess. But as far as my routine, like, I have a set order of things, but I can spend longer on one thing or less, depending on what needs it. And again, like, if there's a week where there's almost no multiple tonguing or, more extended techniques, it's like, I probably need to, like, certainly the week following, like, do more in my routine to get that back up to speed.
So it's almost like you're looking ahead to see, these are the things that are going to be hit at rehearsal or in performances, and these are the things that I'm not going to touch, but they remain absolutely imperative to continue. We both know that you have a whole filing cabinet full of mouthpieces at home, but I know you have a head joint. Is swelling, is muscle fatigue, lip fatigue, is that something that you can alleviate with different instruments? Is that a thing you can do, or is that something that you have to engage with the instrument, the mouthpiece that you have, the head joint that you have as flute players?
I feel like that's a loaded question.
Well, I think so. I would say first that we don't have the same kind of fatigue that brass players do.
Okay.
I think just there is so much less resistance, and the way the embouchure is set, that there isn't. Certainly, if you are out of shape, you can start to feel some fatigue, but generally we don't lose chops over the course of a rehearsal, per se. Is it more or like breath fatigue? Like, where does the strain start to? Shoulder. Okay.
Shoulders and upper back. Yeah, It's just from. Every instrument in the orchestra has a relatively comfortable position, right? Trumpet, you're holding your arms out in front. Trombone, your arms are out in front. Bass, this is pretty natural, right? Comfortable. Yeah. You can't even see the keys of your instrument when you're holding the flute. Like, it's just in a completely different land. So this is totally not natural. And I think that's where that transition from, like, recorder, out in front to the transverse flute to the side is the biggest shift, and that upper body strength for longer periods of time in rehearsals, long rehearsals and long performances, that's, I think, where the fatigue really sets in.
So is stretching a part of your routine? Because,
yes.
Okay, yeah, because I can imagine that, like, you're trying desperately just not to get stiff or stuck. Okay.
I see, because I definitely have, certainly lots of trombones, bass trombones, more especially, have left shoulder problems from holding their instrument. But yeah, speaking of like starting a day, And my routine is like generally 3.5 hours before would be about the most ideal wake up time before the rehearsal starts, so that I can have my breakfast, I can do my stretching, I can do my warm up, but usually something, I sleep in a little bit, and so things get a little more hectic. But yeah, I do 15 minutes of stretching every day before I even buzz, or while I'm buzzing, and rolling out, and other athletic stretches in upper body, lower body, and
I think we're all basically, it's like, yes, our instrument is obviously the fundamentals, the technique, the etudes and the exercises, that's all important, but it's also keeping good care of your body and making sure that can continue to function. It did not occur to me that you would be doing, it's this, right? It's not, it's okay. So that's
Yeah.
The entire, and you still chose it.
Yes.
And that's like a flute is a one size fits all type instrument too, right? Not like with violin, where if you are a smaller person with smaller hands, there are different ways to work around it. They're customized, With a flute, it's like, it's the length that it is. So how that affects your body is going to be different from person to person. And there are so many discussions about the most ergonomic way, which is a little ironic, of holding a flute and all that,
Yes, this is
it's kind of your options are so but it's all, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about head joints though, because that feels like a very, you were kind of talking about mouthpieces and head joints.
I bring it up because as a string player, I do know string players that have multiple bows. They have multiple instruments. They have multiple strings. They change things out. I never had the patience or the money, frankly, to go into that. But it's this idea of a lot of us have the limited ability that if something is getting fatigued or it's not working, you really can't do anything about it except push through. And even when you are messing around with mouthpieces or trying to find things that both work for the repertoire you have to play and for how your face is feeling, I know that it's something has to give. There has to be a compromise where like I can't go any deeper or do a bigger rim than this for this piece. So I'm curious. I don't know if wind players have that flexibility. I know that you all could own multiple instruments, and the flute does have multiple joints, but I don't know if you swap those out because of physically how you're feeling.
It's interesting. I actually bought a new instrument about 1.5 years ago. It's an 18 karat gold flute, so it's very heavy, and I was coming from a silver flute, much lighter than that before, with a 14 karat gold head joint. So the balance of those two instruments is completely different, and the amount of support and air that the gold flute needs to get the metal to resonate is much more than the silver flute, even with the gold head joint. So the combinations of the metals for flute players is something that contributes also to the ease of playing, the resistance that you can get on the instrument, and there are times where I will experience fatigue, and I will pull out my now backup silver flute and play that just because it's a little bit lighter to hold. It's a little bit easier to blow through. I don't have to, tank up and blow the house down as I would have to on the gold flute. So knowing those limitations and that you do have the instrument to facilitate some of that is very helpful. Piccolo players especially are equipment junkies, especially for head joints, because they're, again, we can't hide, so there are certain head joints that will respond in the high register to certain notes, and they just won't on others, and it varies from combination of head joint and body. So there are, I know piccolo players out there, sorry if this is any of you, but that have multiple head joints or instruments on their stands in front of them, because for certain passages, one combination works really well for low register, clear, loud articulation. But if you're trying to play something really high and soft, like the Bolero excerpt, that specific head joint or combination might not work, so you might be crazy enough to swap out your equipment halfway through the piece.
But that does make sense. String players generally, with repertoire, if it's like, well, it's too high or it's too low. I played Opera 3 last year, and I had to borrow Nate's bass while he was out of town because most of that piece required extension. I don't have one. So I learned how to play Nate's bass with an extension because that was what the repertoire required, but I kind of got lucky because Nate's bass was available. You, on the other hand, have you but you're also you have multiple horns as well, but it's not so much a range thing. Obviously alto versus tenor versus bass was one thing. It's less range, but it's more the color of the instrument and the ease of playing it for certain rep, I think.
Yeah, it's exactly like Nick said with the Piccolo stuff, where I mean certainly there are lots of trombonists who play the same setup and make it work and probably love it and stuff, but for me, there's like definitely, I mean, everything's a trade-off, and if you want something to be a little lighter, easier, less resistance, more body, more, more stable, like I can tweak all that to how, I want, and whether, and this is kind of the fun thing for each week, it's like, do I plan my setup for like the hardest, most exposed passage, or do I set it up for something that can do it all? And generally I kind of go for whatever that hardest thing is and backtrack slightly from there maybe, but like I've got like 5 trombone bells, 3 or 4 slides, 3 tuning slides, I don't know, 12 lead pipes. Not that and generally I only use a core of all of those, but like again, like with a pops concert, like I don't want to play something that sounds great on Bruckner for Stevie Wonder. Like I can't do that, and it kind of messed up my playing for a long time my first year when I didn't have those other options. I had my horn from college and high school, and it was a really heavy setup, and both face fatigue and shoulder fatigue. Like I went back to that bell for my solo this fall, and when that was finally over, it's like, oh, okay, like putting on something that's just 100 grams lighter, like it makes a big difference when you're playing for 3-4 hours a day and stuff. So yeah, it's a puzzle, but I enjoy the trying to figure out what works best and gives me the color and ease that I'm going for in my head.
I love the idea of a puzzle for all of this, and this leads me to our last question because we have to let you guys go back to real life, but work-life balance, I don't think musicians have it in the traditional sense because as you guys were describing, our entire lives tend to wrap around making it as easy and natural and pleasant to do our jobs. What do you look forward to in a week where you have less time on stage, though? Like if you had 4 more hours in a day, what would you do?
Sleep.
Let's rephrase. I think like my flute teacher in undergrad put it in this way, which I found really fascinating, was that you need to accept that you work when everyone else has time off. And so then how do you manage, because that also means that perhaps there are other activities that you, or other hobbies that you would like to enjoy doing, but that are scheduled while you are now working. So how do you find that? Like, do you choose to do other hobbies that are more flexible? Does it affect your sleep schedule? Are you a natural like early riser? Does that become a problem? Or do you just, I don't need to, my first thing of the day starts at 7 p.m. or 2:30, so my sleep schedule becomes this, or
Certainly, I mean, like I only planned 1 opera this year, but I think it was a longer opera, and like those weeks when you're getting home at 10:15, 10:30, even if it's not the most exciting playing, like it still takes hours to wind down, and then my sleep schedule, assuming we don't have any MIs or something in the morning, like it's usually messed up for like 2 weeks. But yes, certainly like when I forget to go shopping during the week, during hours when everyone else is doing their own thing. Like, I deeply regret shopping on Saturdays, and so yeah, taking care of those weekly things. Again, when, like you said, everyone else is working.
You end up doing your weekly chores during people's 9 to 5.
Yeah,
and then you're in rehearsal when other people are doing their groceries.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's
or even something as simple as being so fully booked with teaching in the morning, rehearsal in the afternoon, a performance at night, something like that. And then, it's like, oh, I don't have any clean clothes for my performance either. So then it's like 10 o'clock at night and you're doing a load of laundry and you're hungry at the same time, because as far as my routine as well, I don't like to eat a lot before I perform either, because I don't then have room in my stomach to expand, to breathe. So I eat very minimally before a concert too, so that then it's 10:30 at night, I'm ready for dinner,
Yeah,
and it's so our schedules are totally upside down
and flexible, and it varies every single week.
Mm-hmm.
But it also sounds like you if you didn't want your life to be, if you didn't want to be a flute player or a trombonist, if you didn't want to be an orchestral musician, this would probably chafe. And instead, it sounds like you guys have found that this is not a traditional work-life balance, but it is a one that fits. Is that
when
feel
you've
accurate?
Embraced?
Yeah, that's a better way.
So, I think embrace is a beautiful word. In between my undergrad and my master's degrees, I had a 9-to-5 job, working for a company that was a dealer of flutes, and it was a great opportunity to learn about the industry and to do a lot of traveling. But I was still missing that performance side, and it still called to me, and I wanted to take auditions and keep freelancing and all of that. So the 9-to-5 regular just didn't settle. So yeah, I think it's something that you come to embrace.
I love that. It's a great place to call it a day, I think. Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Nick, Pat, Serena.
Thank you.
Yay.
Thank you, Dani.
Yay!
Cool.
That was awesome. You guys are amazing.